Welcome to Life's Rich Tapestry, a podcast exploring the narrative of people's layered lives. Listen in on courageous conversations spoken from the heart. Gain insight into another's life as we tackle compelling topics which will expand your mind, help you gain perspective, and might even inspire you to do things differently. My name is Evelyn, and I look forward to your company. And welcome to another episode of Life's Rich Tapestry. My next guest, Marcus, is a careers counselor who draws on the wisdom of one's soul blueprint to help people form a more complete picture of their vocation, higher purpose, and best use of their gifts in the world. I'd like to welcome Marcus to the show today. Welcome so much, Marcus. I'm so grateful to have you here with me.
Thanks, Evelyn. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Now, I'm going to, because all stories start at the beginning, I just want to give me a little bit of a background on your family history, where you grew up and all that jazz.
Okay, I grew up predominantly in a town called Thirlmere, which is fairly sort of rural, I guess. My parents had a bakery. They worked really hard, and they sort of came from a bit of a scarcity background. So the idea of sort of being financially secure was a huge driver. So I sort of grew up, with that sort of mentality to some extent. And they were, both avowed atheists. So there wasn't any sort of bigger questions, as to why we're here and what we're about. So it was always sort of in the back of my mind for one reason or another. And I guess during my teenage years, I sort of got a bit more experimental, or wanting to sort of consider other ways of living rather than just sort of living for material gain. When I was probably about 14 or 15, I came across astrology just randomly. I thought that was an incredible sort of
tool.
Yeah, just a perspective.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you started seeing what astrology was about. Now, so this was the age where you're trying to figure out what you're going to do with your life. What was there pressure from your family to do a certain job, or?
Yeah, I guess because I was quite good at school, they sort of had already mapped out my career. I was going to be some investment banker type character.
Yeah.
Make a lot of money, use my math skills.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, as I sort of, I guess, first got curious about bigger things, my brother got sort of drawn into fundamentalist Christianity.
Okay.
So he sort of dragged me along for the ride. So just as I came across this idea of astrology, very quickly I sort of got swept into the Christian sort of view of life, and saw that as being not a healthy thing, and didn't touch it for many years.
Okay. Now, so what did you do as a job then? Did you kind of forget about astrology for a while?
Yeah, so I did end up going into finance.
Okay.
As much as I was more drawn to wanting to do something meaningful.
Okay.
But I did that for, a good sort of 10 or 12 years.
Yeah.
And, hit a bit of a crisis point at, interesting enough, what's called the Saturn return, when we sort of hit 29.
Yeah.
And, the question is, what are we really here for? And that really, that sort of pulled me back into that orbit.
Wow.
And that's when I discovered numerology, and that really, the two things together really compelled me to leave the finance world behind and move into something more meaningful.
So how did numerology come into your world? Did you just did you meet somebody, or what happened?
I was working at the tax office and feeling really dispirited, and I did something that was really not something natural for me. I sort of just said to the universe, I need some sort of guidance. So I've never done that before in my 29 years. So I went to get my lunch, and while I was at the mall, I just got drawn to a bookstore. Uh-huh. And I immediately gravitated to this book called Heroes, and it was about the hero's journey, which I'd never heard about before, Joseph Campbell's idea. And at the back of that book, which, totally enlivened me, in the further reading, someone said, the author said that there's this book that can tell you sort of what you're here to do based on your date of birth.
Yeah.
So being so impressed by the book, I thought I'll have a look at this one. Mm-hmm. And when I read that, Dan Millman's, The Life You're Born to Live.
Yeah, I love that book.
And I read my date of birth, I thought, what's going on here? How there's 50 different, types according to this book. How is this person knowing so accurately what my sort of fears are, what my passions are? It's just uncanny, it's bizarre.
Yeah.
And that sort of launched me into the whole wanting to know more about it.
Wow, that's because I was just going to ask kind of a silly question, because finance, you think you're into numbers already, kind of, if that drew you in, because it kind of is about numbers.
Well, I guess the numerology was part of it, and at the time I was going to a spiritualist church as well just afterwards, and the lady there was running an astrology workshop. So while I'm reading the book on one hand, this lady's also, exposing me to astrology on the other. And it was probably only a few years later that I got really interested in wanting to really study this in depth. And I had a friend who knew astrology, and she would rattle off all this complexity, and it's like, I can't imagine ever being able to delve in that deeply. I was blown away by it. So I thought maybe I'd do numerology because I was always good at maths.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that one drew me or the other. I just thought it's going to be easier.
Right.
And I guess in time I realised they're both equally nuanced, but that's what sort of led me into it.
So now you've quit your job, your finance job. What do you do next?
So when I left that, I decided to teach adult education. The only work that I could get into was working with people who are long-term unemployed, because you didn't need any particular background to work in that vocational field. And so they gave me a week to do these motivational vocational workshops. And so that was radically different. Like when I was doing finance, I just felt totally hollow. But being able to do something to motivate people and inspire them and, have some creative autonomy in my teaching, it totally was such a new world. I used to, go into a sense of mourning on a Sunday afternoon thinking about going back to the bank. And now it's like, when is the weekend over so I can get to work? So it was such a different shift.
So now you're motivating people now to get into a new field or new career path. So when did you mix in the astrology and numerology into that?
Well, I had this really good boss who was open to doing different things. And she said, look, the old model, the government model they give us doesn't really work. Do whatever you like. If you have some impact, I don't care what you do in there. So, apart from showing them some, uplifting movies and sharing all these interesting stories, part of the sort of week I looked at their numerology life paths, which is something most people had never seen before. So it was pretty interesting to get paid, to essentially be helping people look at their higher purpose.
And so when you gave them their number from their birth date, were they like overwhelmed or impressed or like, oh my gosh, I really do like what you've just told me?
Yeah, I guess everyone was different. So for some people, they'd really take a lot out of that. Otherwise, that was just one element in the whole thing of reevaluating their lives, seeing themselves very differently.
Because of the easiness of numerology, I feel, do people resonate towards that more, or do you find that they just think, oh, this is hogwash, I don't even want to go down that path?
So quite often I'll work with people when they're sort of coming on a retreat program, so they're there for a couple of days, and they're experiencing all different things. So I might sort of look at their beliefs and their values, or they might work with my colleague Ginny, and she might be doing like an intuitive tarot reading or some energy work. So for a lot of people, when they've got those 2 days to fill, there's that invitation. Would you like to look at these charts, numerology and astrology? And occasionally you'll get someone who says, just give me my astrology. Other people will say, look, I'm not really interested in either of those two approaches. But most people will say, I'm happy to do both.
In your work, though, what do you find works better?
A lot of people who are coming, and they are seekers and curious people, they've dabbled in astrology. It's a bit more common. So for a lot of people who have not really explored numerology at all, it's a bit of a revelation. Because the astrology stuff, they sort of know a little bit of that. They've, explored their sun sign.
Yeah, that's true.
But for a lot of people, numerology is a totally new thing.
Can you tell me the history about it? Like, is it the Babylonians or the Egyptians with
the
numerology?
So my understanding is Pythagoras grew up in that culture that was very cerebral. How do we find truth through the mind? They're debating, they're reading books, they're discussing. And then in his 40s, he had the great insight to work out, I wonder if every other culture just sits around and debates and discusses and does it mentally, or is there other approaches to finding truth? So he took this 10-year sabbatical, and among his travels, the place that most impressed him was Egypt. And the Egyptians said, look, you've got a great mastery of mathematics. You see that as the practical building blocks of life, but you're seeing it two-dimensionally. These numbers are actually living entities, they're archetypal. And so when you choose to be incarnate, you choose a particular date of birth because that's going to give you the opportunities to give you that area of growth that you can most move into. So the numbers 1 to 9 capture the whole of the human spectrum. If we look at, say, the number 1, it's about our identity. Everyone's got their own individual identity. When we get to the number 2, we're social animals. We need to relate and be in partnership. So that's an aspect of life. The number 3 is about creative expression and communication, these sorts of things. So when we look at the whole sort of 9 areas, they're vital to all of us, but there's a certain configuration or a particular archetype that we're maybe deficient in, or we've done it really poorly in the past and we want to improve on that. So, that sort of got Pythagoras thinking. Numbers don't just explain our, the seasons and the practical aspects of life. It actually explains why we're here and why I'm here. And so he then went back and he continued teaching the natural sciences, the mathematics, the geometries. But for a select people, he initiated them into what he called his mystery school, and numerology was a big centerpiece of that.
It sounds complex, but it kind of is in a way, because there's so many elements that go into it. Now, you also talk about something called the soul blueprint. Okay, what is that?
Well, if you think about, you're a builder and you want to build, a hospital or whatever it may be, you need to sort of follow some sort of plan. You made sure the engineering's structurally sound and all these sorts of things. In the same way, when we come into, this incarnation, we're choosing a particular blueprint to follow. So let's say your blueprint, for instance, is the number 9. This is the humanitarian archetype. So you're looking to learn. It's like a bit of a PhD in life. It's the final lesson in some sense. So you're coming to experience, the deep grief and pain of carrying the weight of the world. When we think about people when we add up their date of birth and it comes to the number 9, their life path, their big direction in life, we're looking at people like Gandhi, Mother Teresa, Bob Marley. So they're all doing things very differently. For Bob Marley, it was this idea that music can bring greater peace and harmony in the world, and that was his sort of mission, is to do that on a big scale. For Gandhi, it was to stand up to the imperialists. So with your number here, there's a sense of you've come to explore those bigger issues. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to be famous or doing something on the global stage. You are looking at the greater collective.
Okay.
Whereas someone at the opposite end of the scale, say the number 1, that's sort of more personal. They've come to be competitive and prove themselves and their identity. Yeah. Where you're looking at the impersonal, the greater collective. It's a higher responsibility.
Yeah. Because I do know a little bit about numbers, and people who are listening right now might not know what the numbers are. So kind of just explain, how do you find your number?
So there's a few different ways of looking at it, but essentially if you add up all the digits in your date of birth, it gives you a double number. So in my case, I'm born on the 16th of the 1st, 1975. So when I add up every digit, it comes to 30.
Okay.
And then with that double digit, we reduce that down. So 3 and 0 is 3.
Okay.
Where in your case, your numbers come to 29, 2 and 7 becomes 9.
Right.
So what that means for your sort of life path is that you've come to work with 3 different energies. The 9 being the biggest one, but those sub-aspects of the 2 and the 7, you've got to really work well with them to then step into your higher purpose of, doing more of the humanitarian work.
Okay.
Where in my case, having just the pure 3, I'm really working that in an amplified, concentrated way. So to give you, your listeners an example of someone who shares my number, but someone that they probably may be familiar with, someone famous, on one hand, we've got Bill Cosby.
Oh, okay.
So someone who's using their words, their abilities to really impact people in his way. He was able to do that with his comedy, had this great gifting. But then he had this very dark side where he manipulated women, in his predatory way. So every archetype's got that shadow and light aspect.
Do you is it because he has the 0 there?
The 0 indicates that if you're using it for good, it's amplified.
Got it.
So when he was, doing his comedy work, and it was about tackling family issues or showing that you can use humour without needing to, do it in a derogatory or full of expletive sort of approach. Yeah. There was something noble about that. But he had this very splintered off shadow side that he didn't work with.
I love your website. adifferentdrummer.com.au. And that's also the title of your book. So just explain a little, we'll talk first about your book, and then we'll talk a little bit about what you do in your work.
Okay, so I was working for this outdoor education centre called Outward Bound. It had sort of run its course. I found I'd sort of got a bit stagnant, or I was sort of hiding from, my deeper passion there. And they gave me this opportunity. They said, look, you've done a really good job. We want to make you the HR manager. So they gave me this great opportunity. But in my gut, I knew that would take me further away from my sort of passion, or what I felt to be my purpose. So I said, look, I'm just comfortable in this recruitment role. I'm not wanting to take on that higher responsibility. They said, okay, in that case, we want you out so we can train someone else. So I was thrown out of this comfortable existence. And the only thing that I knew to sort of move towards going forward was to write a book. And that basically came from, I taught this little short course, and the people said, we really love this little workbook that you created, and maybe you should do that, or do that in a bigger way. So then that led me to sort of write this book about my vocational journey and the importance of finding, your passion, especially as I had that contrast between really being disconnected from work and really being enlivened by it. So that, that life-changing experience I had when I found that passion or vocation, I wanted to share that with people and look at all the reasons that people sort of get impeded from that, from their, family origin, from the education system, from their attachment to, financial security. Mm-hmm. So, I guess that was the sort of motivation. That's what became the material to sort of work with.
And that book is available on your website, right? If people want to order that.
Yeah, I've just done it as a digital book. I didn't sort of go further with the printing process. But that's something you can just click on and $9.95 and you're away.
Okay, there you go. How did you come up for the name for that book?
Oh, just that famous Thoreau quote, about, if someone's following their own drum beat, just honour that. Something really spoke to me, that metaphor.
Now, you also have retreats, and your retreats also do involve, finding your blueprint. And I mean, there's lots of different retreats there. But since we're talking about astrology and numerology, how often do you have those retreats?
So because it's like a one-on-one intensive rather than a group experience, it's just simply a matter of someone inquires, they're wanting to do it. If the space is available, then just teeing up a sort of time to do that.
And have you found that you transform people's lives?
Yeah, what's really good is, I guess, like everything, some people come with either they're really receptive or they've done a certain amount of development and, they're just ready to sort of launch forward. Other people, it's like they're in a crisis mode, that you're going to try anything and you're just sort of planting some seeds. But it's really good with the people who are receptive and open and ready for that growth to get their feedback, a year or so later. Just want to let you know that, since having that time with you, this is what I'm doing now, this is my new job, this is my new life. And, that was really, instrumental in helping me sort of make that transition.
So what do you love most about your job?
I think the fact that there's that variety aspect, but it's also helping people sort of come in with, one view of themselves and leaving with a totally different one. Because that's something that sort of changed my life when I read that book that said, you're here to inspire people to use your words positively, all this sort of business. That was something I related to, but I didn't see that as being my vocation. So when I'm trapped in a finance role, not expressing that, I didn't realise that going against my sort of soul blueprint was the reason why I was so disconnected there.
Do you also work with names, people's names?
So with your chart, your date of birth, which we sort of mentioned earlier, you derive sort of a fair chunk from that, but also one's name is responsible for the other half. So that's where you might have people born at the precise same time, so they're going to have the same astrological charts, but then by having different names, that sort of steers them or colours them in a different direction.
So if somebody wants to book a soul blueprint reading, how does that actually work, or what do they need to bring along with them?
In terms of the details, people just need their date of birth and the full name on their birth certificate. So that's all that you need for your numerology. With your astrology, you also need your place of birth, which most people are aware of, and the time of birth, which some people have an idea, some people have it accurate, some people have no idea. So that limits the amount of astrological nuance you can go into, but you can still come up with a fair amount. So typically, if I'm working with someone over a 2-day retreat, one day we might finish up with looking at their numerology chart, and the next day we might do the astrology. Doing, both in one day is, for a lot of people who are new to it, it's a lot to take in. So I would imagine that, if someone was wanting to get a reading done, they might start with, whether it's numerology or astrology, just have that first session for, the hour or two or whatever it may be. And then, if that information has been valuable and they, they've sort of sat with it and, read through the sort of material that I give them to take away, then they might, go and book another one doing the opposite. If they've done numerology, they might do astrology the next time around.
Now, in astrology, I know that each year you can do something which is called a solar return, which kind of predicts what's going to happen for the year. Is there something similar in numerology?
So numerology is really big on this idea that with the 9 numbers, we go through a 9-year cycle. So if you're thinking about gardening as an analogy, that seed is the number 1 in a sense. So you think of the energy that's required for an acorn to become a giant oak. Only 1 in 10,000 are going to make it. So much has to happen to make that work. It's got to germinate, it's got to find enough sunlight, water, all these sorts of things. So when people are in what's called a 1 cycle, there's it's a new chapter, there's a whole new fresh energy, they're ready to go in a sense. Great time to, start a business perhaps, or start a new career or those sorts of things. So this goes on for us individually and also collectively. So collectively, if we add up the year, so 2023, 2 and 2 is 4, 4 and 3 is 7. So we're in a 7-year. So if we go back and we look at, say, 2019, we're in a number 3 year. So this is just, before the sort of COVID sort of stuff is happening. So in a 3, in the number 3, that's sociable, that's like the child, that's play, travel, all this sort of stuff. So we're still able to do that. We're still able to cruise and, go on our airplanes. And then that sort of starts to finish as COVID comes in. So collectively, we're having to let go of all that, playfulness, frivolous life in some sense. And then 2020 steps in, and now, COVID, we're in the thick of that. So 4 is like the polarity of the 3. It's like the adult. There's this responsibility, there's restriction. So now we can't go on our planes, we can't leave the house, all these sorts of things. Then if we go to 2021, we're now in a 5-year. So 5's about change and adaptability and all this sort of business. So the buzzword was pivoting. A business that couldn't go in its old model has invented a new way to sort of move forward. We would make plans, but then change them. We had the term the new normal, these sorts of things. So that was very much in keeping with that. And then last year, as we've gone into 2022, the 6th year, 6 is like the nurturing mother, healing aspect. So you had all this chaos from the previous years where families were divided. You're vaccinated, I'm not vaccinated, we don't want to talk to you. So now, last year, there was a healing around that. We've moved beyond the fear, we're ready to re-engage. And now this year, 2023, the 7 year, 7's about sort of going deeply within or, wanting to ask the bigger questions. It's a bit more of a contemplative sort of spiritual year in a sense.
Yeah. So these are collective years for the world, but can somebody find their personal year?
Yeah, so if we put in your date of birth, your day and your month and the year, then we're going to have a particular year.
Got it.
For instance, mine being the 16th of January, if I add, those 2 numbers with the 7 collective year, I find that I'm in a 6 year.
Okay. Great. You find that you're...
So what the world was going through last year, I'm going into this year.
Oh, okay.
So everyone's different in where they are in the cycle. But to know where you are, not just collectively but individually, it allows you to flow with that aspect. For me last year, it was about taking risks, the 5s, changing, adapting, allowing all this sort of, all these things to happen. And because I was aware of that and I stepped into it, it was a really effective year. But let's say it's also really helpful for relationships because you might be going into a 7 year where you're withdrawing, you're going inwards, and your husband or they might be going into, say, a 3, really sociable, outward stuff. And so you might think, what's wrong with our relationship?
Yeah.
He's too noisy and he's finding me too withdrawn, but you're just going in different cycles. So understanding that is also great for relationships, be it you and your partner or you and your kids, knowing where you're both going.
Now, if anybody would like to read a book, or what books do you encourage people to, if they want to start their journey in numerology or astrology?
Dan Millman's pretty hard to go past in terms of, the life you're born to live. And he's recently updated it to capture the new generation. So as we've stepped into the year 2000, there's been this radical change. So for you and I, and so many other people, we're born with a 1 year. We're born, for me, 1975.
Mm-hmm.
We're living in that year that's collectively got a 1 within it.
Okay.
So when we come to the year 2000, suddenly as we're going from that hyper-masculine to that very much partner, receptive, cooperative energy, we've now got these kids that are hugely sensitive. They've got anxiety disorders, all these sorts of things. And, people like our age are employing these youngsters, and it's like, why aren't they driven? They're not interested in money or getting ahead. They just want to get along with people.
It's so true. I never even thought about this generational thing from being born in the to 2000. It actually makes sense to me. So yeah, that now that you've pointed that out.
Well, it's a total game changer because in one sense, we've got a responsibility to these young people who are wanting to restore order. If you think about the environmental approach, it's not sustainable. So they're wanting things to sort of heal and they want to contribute towards that, but they're overwhelmed. So if we look at someone like Greta Thunberg, her number is number 9, but it's a pure 9. We haven't seen that for a couple of thousand years.
Yeah.
So yours is diffused by the 2 and the 7. She has it in that purity. So that humanitarian taking on the weight of the world is so much more intense. So when she found out what was going on environmentally and the fact that adults were just blasé, she didn't talk for about 3 years.
Wow.
So this is, this is how intensely the new generation feels. And we need that because otherwise we just continue to destroy the place.
So with your website, adifferentdrummer.com.au. I've noticed you offer a whole bunch of different courses, retreats. So if anybody wants to get in contact with you, how does that work?
So I guess the website's sort of segmented depending on what they're sort of looking at doing. So for people who are maybe interested in these sort of numerology, astrology blueprints, they can sort of read through that and maybe see if there's a reading or a session they want to do there. For other people, they might sort of want more career guidance or that sense of, life purpose and looking at their sort of values and their passions and integrating these various things. So there's a section on the site that's dedicated to, that more vocational path. And then the third avenue would be the retreats, where there might be a particular area that they're sort of wanting to explore. There's quite a lot. Recently I've created one called the Rewilding Retreat for people who want to get more in touch with sort of nature, have a healthier relationship with technology, live more simply.
Yeah.
So depending on, what someone's interests are, whether they're interested in the metaphysical or more of the practical aspects of life, there's something, for anyone who's wanting to further their self-discovery and, live, more passionately.
How do people actually apply for jobs now?
So there's lots of little changes, I guess, with the youngsters. If you're looking for working for Google somewhere creative, they'll have a video resume, where people get a sense of you. Or there'll be, if you're doing a creative field, you'll have like a portfolio. People go to your websites or see, YouTube videos and things. So there is little tweaks to it, but at the end of the day, typically, it's bringing two people together. The jobs that are most interesting and, what you're probably going to be passionate about are really competitive. The mundane jobs that people aren't wanting to do, there's lots of them around, working in a factory all day.
Yeah.
So if you're wanting to do a job that you really care about, that really meets, your values and you're with an organisation you're socially aligned with, you can expect that there's some sort of competition for that. Just simply sending your, old resume that you send to this, that and the other doesn't really sort of work. So that's where it's valuable to, use someone who can sort of help you paint yourself in the best picture so you get past that gatekeeper. And then when you're in the interview, if you've got what it takes and your, enthusiasm comes forward, you've got a better chance. But if you don't have that written application that, gets past the hundreds of other applicants, you're not really giving yourself the best chance of moving into what you're really most passionate about.
Yeah. So you do help people with that as well, with the resume writing and all that as well.
Yeah, whether it's resume writing, cover letters, selection criteria.
Yeah.
The whole process.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I'm so grateful that you've come in today. And I think anybody who is interested in looking for a new career path or figuring themselves out, because I think it is important to figure out who you are inside and make sure that you're doing what you're meant to be doing. So thank you so much for coming in today. Thanks.
Great.
Marcus.
Thanks, Evelyn.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank Thank you so much for your company. Please tune in next week to Life's Rich Tapestry, where you will hear another courageous conversation spoken from the heart.